We are back. This is Where You Live with Gene and Tony. We're broadcasting from the Concierge Landscape Studios, and we're brought to you by Extreme Exteriors and the American Family Insurance Agent, Kim Bennett Agency. It's time now for a message from the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. The MHA Minute is brought to you by Pest Control Services. When you need an exterminator, you want someone reliable and effective, give Greg Keener a call at Pest Control Services, 952-894-9748. Pest Control Services is a proud member of Angie's List and is a member of the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. That's Pest Control Services, 852-894-9748. And tell Greg that Gene and Tony sent you.
Some of the benefits of successful property management. Are you ready? On-time payment of rent, improved resident quality, stabilized income, reduced turnover, controlled expenses, improved financial performance, less property wear and tear, allowance for property improvements, enhanced property value, being proactive, not reactive, better relationships with neighbors, fewer police calls, creating a community, being a great neighbor. These are some of the benefits of good property management. And whether you run a townhome association or you are renting out your condo, duplex, or 100-plus unit building, membership with the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association gives you the tools you need to run your business effectively while minimizing the headaches. Don't be a good landlord, be a great one. Visit www.mmha.com. That's two M's, mmha.com.
We're happy to have with us as guests on the show today Bill and Susan Rappan, who have the distinction of being the first volunteers for the Condominium Ombudsman Office dealing with HOA issues in Florida. When it was started in 2004. They have taken that to continue on with a career in teaching HOAs and helping people to understand what this thing is called an HOA because of the understanding that a lot of what people are disgruntled about and may be upset about is just simply a fact of not being educated, not knowing what they should about living in that kind of community. But what caught our interest, folks, in having them on the show today was a opinion piece called Accountability and Responsibility. And Bill and Susan, you began the article by saying that you would like to begin with a basic premise. And you say, owning a home is not a right, it's a privilege. Can you explain that?
Yes. The government of the United States, I think it was Barney Frank, he kept making the judgment that people had the right to own a home. I always felt it was a privilege. You save your money, you put out a down payment, and you plan to live in that house for X amount of years, and you have a responsibility. But what happened was people were buying homes, and ones that they really couldn't afford because they were given liar's loans by the bank.
And what's a liar? What's a liar
I
loan?
hadn't heard that phrase before.
Right. Well, what they were actually doing is they were giving them a form that you normally filled out. Many years ago, it was quite an extensive form, and they were just passing it right through without doing any checking.
Yeah.
They didn't do any verification of what you told them.
And over the last few years, it's changed now, but that changed from a liar loan to where the government was putting pressure, saying, let's just not put stated income as even a qualification for someone getting a loan. If they feel they can handle it, let them have it.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And people were buying homes years ago. If you made X amount of dollars, you took that figure, multiplied it by 3, and that was basically what you could afford in a mortgage. But today they weren't. Since 2000, when 2006 rolled around, and 7 and 8, they were using They were thinking that I really can't afford it now, but that home is going to increase in value. And I can flip it in a couple of years, and I can make all this cash, or
Make a quick buck.
Take out a line of credit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And do what they did. And then all of a sudden, in 2009, there was the crash.
Yeah.
Things weren't the same, and people got caught behind the 8 ball.
Now people are in homes they really could never have afforded in the first place.
Yeah. No,
That's correct. And they could have possibly corrected. I remember Bill Gross, who was the CEO of PIMCO, that's a famous mutual fund. He had stated that maybe at this point in time, in 2008 and 9, when the crisis occurred, he said maybe we should extend that mortgage to 40 or 50 years and lower the interest rate. The banks didn't want to have anything to do with it, but in the long run, that may have been a very good idea. They would have stayed in those homes. The banks wouldn't have had anything bad on their balance sheet, and we may not have had the crash that we have. But
there are other places that are doing that. If I'm not mistaken, I think Japan will have longer mortgages than the traditional 30-year that we have here in the United States.
Yeah, that's correct. I think they go up to 50 right now, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
Okay.
And but the premise here that you're talking about is that we've seemed to have moved away from a society. We want to concentrate on what we consider our rights, what we should have, instead of talking about our responsibility, our accountability that we have.
That's correct. That's exactly right. And a lot of these people, they should have said to themselves, is, you know what, I really can't afford to buy the house, but I can afford to rent.
Yeah, when you said, years ago, I remember when I first bought my first home, I think it was 1981. Yes, there were income guidelines that made sense. I remember the first time someone going through and saying, hey, you can afford making this kind of payment. And I remember saying to myself, wait a minute, even you say I could afford that payment. I'm paying less in rent. I want to pay a smaller amount. I don't want to pay necessarily that amount because
that seemed like too much.
Yeah, you've got a lifestyle,
for your monthly budget. Yeah.
But over the last few years, you're right. This whole thing with the mortgage mess that we have gotten into, all came down because of this. Everybody saying that this was a right. Don't you think that some of this was also fueled? If I remember correctly, a lot of people in the federal government were also saying that we need to open it up because they thought that there was a disenfranchisement with minorities and with other people who weren't able to get loans, and that this was a way to make home ownership accessible for everybody.
That's possible also. Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
How did you see? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
I'm just going to chime in for a second. It's not a discrimination issue. It all goes back to her first sentence in her blog.
Yeah.
It's still not a right. We just can't go around giving people homes and then say, okay, fend for yourself.
Right.
Then we get back to the accountability. I love what she said toward the end. That it's nice to say, well, I'm going to live here for free and let everybody else pay for me.
Right.
But that doesn't work for us. And I'll tell you something else, too. When you see these people, and it's true, and you have it in every single state, walking around having a good time and not paying a penny.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was what I was going to ask, Bill, was how do you see this playing out within homeowners associations? Maybe you can explain how this has impacted community associations.
Well, the first thing that happened was people got frustrated. They said, well, what can we do about it? How are these people living in these units for a year or two or more without paying a penny to us for our amenity fees or our maintenance fees, and not paying a penny to the bank and having a great time sitting by the pool and going to the clubhouse and whatever else?
Yeah.
And this had a great impact. So the government here in the legislature here in Florida said, okay, well, as you noted in the article, they said, okay, we'll take your rights away. You can't go to the clubhouse. You can't vote here. Mm-hmm. Well, P.S., a lot of those people could care less.
They had a free roof over their heads.
Accountability, because, hey, listen, she said it right here. I mean, our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they would, if you told them go bankrupt or let your neighbor pay for you, they would have said, "Oh my God, I'll never do that."
That would have been an embarrassment. Yeah,
that would have been a shameful thing.
Let me ask you.
Where they came from, that just didn't happen.
Yeah,
and they stood through the long haul. They didn't say, "Well, 2 years from now I'll worry about it." They said, "Look, we moved here. We're going to live here for a long time. so be it.
Yeah.
Yep, we're responsible.
Excuse me a second. We've got a hard break. We've got to come up to in about 30 seconds. So we don't have much time. But at the end, you state that the concepts of accountability and responsibility are slowly disappearing. In 30 seconds, tell our listeners, what do you think can be done to bring them back?
Well, you have to foreclose on the units. And that's what it is. And the banks here are very slow in foreclosing on the units because once the banks foreclose on the units, then they have to start paying the maintenance.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
Because all this time that they're not paying the maintenance, all the people who are left paying, they get a little larger larger piece of that pie.
So basically asking people to step up and be responsible for the contract they signed. What an interesting concept. Say, Bill and Susan, we're running out of time. Thanks so much for being with us on today's show.
It was a pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Folks, don't go away. We have a whole nother hour after these messages.